A weathered elderly farmer stands trembling in a sterile hospital waiting room, clutching a tattered photograph and faded birth certificate as doctors fight to save the young hiker she pulled from a deadly blizzard. For 38 years, she had searched for the grandson her estranged daughter had given up for adoption before vanishing from her life. Now, as a DNA test confirms what a worn military dog tag and distinctive family birthmark have already revealed, Eleanor Marshall must decide whether to tell this unconscious stranger the truth, that the blizzard didn't bring a random hiker to her remote farm, but the missing piece of her fractured family she'd been searching for her entire life. Before we dive deeper into this extraordinary story of fate and reunion, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. And if you're intrigued by what's coming, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's video reveals an even more incredible twist that connects these two strangers in ways nobody could have imagined. Eleanor Marshall tugged her worn wool hat lower over her ears as she secured the last of the greenhouse windows against the approaching storm. At 72, her joints protested the cold Montana air, but decades of working Pinewood Farm had taught her to respect nature's warnings. The meteorologist on her battery-powered radio had upgraded the forecast from ordinary snowfall to a potential blizzard, and Eleanor knew better than most how quickly the mountain weather could turn deadly. "Come on, Max," she called to her aging border collie, who obediently trotted from his inspection of the perimeter. "Let's get inside before this hits." The first heavy snowflakes were already beginning to fall as Eleanor made her final checks, livestock secured in the barn, with extra feed, generator tested and ready, enough firewood stacked by the hearth to last several days. Living alone on an isolated property 30 miles from the nearest town required preparation and self-reliance, qualities Eleanor had perfected during her 40 years at Pinewood. Inside her modest farmhouse, the warmth enveloped her like a familiar embrace. The kitchen, with its well-worn oak table and wood-burning stove, formed the heart of a home filled with evidence of a solitary but purposeful life. Shelves lined with home-canned vegetables from her garden, handmade quilts draped over simple furniture, and walls adorned with faded photographs told the story of a woman who had built meaning from the fragments of a shattered family. Eleanor moved to the stove where a pot of venison stew, made from last season's deer, harvested from her own land, simmered gently. As she stirred the rich mixture, her gaze drifted to the calendar hanging beside the refrigerator. A small red circle marked next Tuesday's date, a ritual she had maintained for 38 years without fail. Another birthday for a grandson she had never been allowed to meet. The wooden chest at the foot of her bed upstairs contained the physical manifestation of her heartache. 38 carefully wrapped presents, one for each birthday, never opened and never to be delivered. Books selected for different ages, hand-knitted sweaters sized for a growing boy, a hand-carved chess set for his 15th birthday, a leather-bound journal for his 21st. Tokens of love for a child who existed only in the painful hollows of her imagination. The wind picked up outside, whistling through the eaves of the old farmhouse like a mournful ghost. Eleanor ladled stew into a ceramic bowl, the same pattern she'd used for decades, and settled at the kitchen table. Max curled at her feet, sensing as he always did when melancholy threatened to overtake his mistress. "It's just another storm," Eleanor murmured, though whether she was reassuring the dog or herself remained unclear. "We've weathered worse." Indeed they had. The literal storms that regularly battered their mountain home paled in comparison to the emotional tempest that had torn Eleanor's life apart nearly 4 decades earlier. The memories, though dulled by time, remained embedded in her consciousness like splinters too deep to extract. Her teenage daughter Sarah's rebellion after Thomas's death, the bitter arguments, Sarah's departure with the drifter boyfriend when she was barely 18, and the devastating letter that arrived 7 months later. Eleanor's hand instinctively moved to the locked drawer in the sideboard, where she kept what little information she possessed about her grandson. A copy of a birth certificate with only a birth date and time, no name. A blurry photograph of a newborn with a distinctive crescent-shaped birthmark behind his right ear, identical to his mother's and grandmother's. And the adoption agency paperwork, revealing only that he had been placed with a military family. The official records were sealed, the agency uncooperative, and Sarah had vanished completely, her final letter pleading with Eleanor not to search for either of them. Despite this, Eleanor had spent years and much of her savings on private investigators and legal avenues, all yielding nothing but dead ends and fading hope. 10 years ago, Eleanor had finally stopped actively searching, accepting that some wounds were not meant to heal in this lifetime. She had channeled her energy instead into her farm, developing Pinewood's reputation for heirloom vegetables and medicinal herbs. The mail-order business she had built provided enough income to maintain her independence, and her knowledge of traditional growing methods had earned her respect in the sustainable farming community. The storm intensified as Eleanor finished her simple meal, the wind now howling with full fury against the windows. She moved to throw another log on the fire when something unusual caught her attention, a faint but distinct sound cutting through the storm's chaos. She paused, head cocked, wondering if her aging ears were playing tricks. There it was again. Not the wind, but something almost like a cry. Max heard it too, rising to his feet with a low growl that transformed into an alert bark. "What is it, boy?" Eleanor moved to the window, wiping condensation from the glass, to peer into the swirling whiteness that had engulfed her property. Visibility was nearly zero. The powerful floodlights she had installed on the barn barely penetrating the dense curtain of snow. The sound came a third time, definitely human, definitely distressed. Eleanor's heart quickened. No one in their right mind would be out in weather like this, especially not on the back mountain trails that crossed the edge of her property. Those remote paths were treacherous even in good conditions, accessible primarily to experienced hikers and the occasional hunter. Without hesitation, Eleanor moved into action with the efficiency of someone accustomed to handling emergencies alone. She pulled on her heavy, insulated coveralls, thick gloves, and the military-grade cold-weather boots that had been her one concession to modern equipment. Grabbing the powerful flashlight from its charging station and her emergency medical kit, she whistled for Max. "Stay close," she instructed the dog, knowing his superior senses would be crucial in the blinding storm. She secured a length of sturdy rope around her waist and the doorknob, an old mountaineer's trick to ensure she could find her way back if the storm worsened. As Eleanor stepped into the howling maelstrom, the cold struck like a physical blow, momentarily stealing her breath. The snow had already accumulated to nearly knee-height, and the wind whipped it into disorienting patterns that made navigation treacherous. Max pressed against her leg, both guide and guardian in the chaos. "Hello?" She called into the storm, her voice immediately swallowed by the wind. "If you can hear me, call out again." For several agonizing moments, there was nothing but the storm's fury. Then, faintly to her right, toward the old hiking trail that skirted her eastern property line, came a weak response. Eleanor and Max moved carefully through the deepening snow, the flashlight beam creating a tunnel of visibility in the swirling white. The rope at her waist played out behind her, a lifeline to the warmth and safety of the farmhouse that grew more distant with each laborious step. What Eleanor could not possibly know as she battled the elements was that fate had orchestrated a reunion decades in the making, that the dying stranger in the blizzard carried in his very blood the answers to prayers she had long ago stopped believing would be answered. Eleanor Marshall pulled her weathered hands from the soil of her greenhouse and squinted at the darkening sky through the glass panels overhead. At 72, Her body had begun to protest the decades of physical labor that maintaining Pinewood Farm required. But her mind remained as sharp as the clippers she used to trim her prized heirloom roses. The approaching storm had changed course. According to the weather radio, it would hit harder than originally predicted, and Eleanor knew she needed to secure the property before nightfall. The small farm nestled in the hills of western Montana had been her sanctuary for nearly 40 years, a place to heal after her family had splintered apart in ways she had never imagined possible. What had started as a desperate attempt to create a new life had gradually transformed into a respected small-scale operation, known regionally for its organic herbs and Eleanor's remarkable ability to nurture plants that others had given up for dead. She wiped her hands on her faded work apron and moved toward the farmhouse, her border collie Max trotting faithfully at her heels. The first heavy drops of rain began to fall as she reached the porch, and the distant rumble of thunder confirmed that the storm was advancing quickly. Eleanor checked her mental list: greenhouse secured, animals in the barn, generator fueled and ready. Living alone on a remote property had taught her to be meticulous about storm preparations. Inside, Eleanor went through her evening routine, preparing a simple dinner from vegetables she had grown herself. The farmhouse was modest but comfortable, its walls covered with photographs that chronicled her life, though a careful observer would notice the conspicuous gap of nearly a decade, a period from which no family photos remained displayed. Only one image from that time held a place of honor by her bedside, a young woman holding a newborn baby, her face a younger version of Eleanor's own. As she ate her dinner at the kitchen table, Eleanor's gaze drifted to the calendar hanging on the refrigerator door, a red circle marking next Tuesday's date. Another year, another birthday for a grandson she had never been allowed to know. 38 years of birthdays marked by quiet ritual, a small gift purchased, wrapped, and stored in the cedar chest at the foot of her bed, joining the others that would never be opened. The sound of the storm intensified, wind howling around, the eaves of the old farmhouse and rain lashing against the windows. Eleanor was grateful for the solid construction that had weathered countless Montana winters. The weather forecast had mentioned possible hikers still on the nearby national forest trails, and she said a small prayer for their safety. The mountain could be merciless to those who underestimated its moods. Little did Eleanor know that as she prepared for a solitary evening, weathering the storm, fate was already guiding a stranger toward her property, a young man whose presence would unlock the carefully preserved vault of memories she had sealed away decades ago. Pinewood Farm had not always been Eleanor's solitary domain. In the early 1970s, she and her husband Thomas had purchased the property with dreams of raising their daughter Sarah in the wholesome environment of rural Montana, far from the tumultuous social landscape of urban America. Thomas, a Vietnam veteran seeking peace after the horrors of war, had found solace in working the land, while Eleanor, a former high school biology teacher, had applied her knowledge to developing sustainable growing methods decades before they became fashionable. For 12 years, the family had thrived. Sarah had grown into a bright, spirited teenager who inherited her father's artistic temperament and her mother's stubborn determination. The family photos from those years showed them standing proudly together beside prize-winning vegetables at county fairs, or fishing in the creek that ran through their property, their faces bright with the certainty that their lives would always unfold together. But the idyllic life had fractured when Thomas died suddenly of a heart attack when Sarah was 15. The loss had affected Sarah profoundly, transforming her from a studious, cooperative teenager into a rebellious young woman who rejected Eleanor's attempts to maintain structure and stability. By 17, Sarah had fallen in with a group of friends who fed her newfound hunger for experiences beyond the confines of their small rural community. The arguments between mother and daughter had grown increasingly bitter, culminating in Sarah's announcement at 18 that she was leaving Montana with her boyfriend, a charismatic drifter 10 years her senior who had passed through their town with vague talk of opportunities in California. Eleanor's pleas and warnings had fallen on deaf ears, and Sarah had departed with harsh words that would echo in her mother's heart for decades. For nearly 2 years, contact had been minimal. Occasional postcards from different West Coast locations, brief phone calls that revealed little about Sarah's circumstances. Then came the call that changed everything. Sarah, voice trembling, revealing she was 5 months pregnant and alone, the boyfriend having abandoned her when she refused to terminate the pregnancy. Eleanor had immediately sent money for a bus. Ticket home, had prepared Sarah's old bedroom with fresh linens and had even begun converting the small office into a nursery. But Sarah never arrived. The money had been cashed, but no daughter had appeared at the bus station where Eleanor waited. With growing desperation, 3 more months passed before Eleanor received a brief letter with no return address. Sarah had given birth to a healthy boy, but had arranged a private adoption through an agency in Seattle. She believed the baby deserved better than she could provide and wanted no further contact with either the child or Eleanor. The letter ended with a plea that Eleanor not search for either of them. Sarah was starting a new life and wanted to leave the past behind completely. For Eleanor, the loss had been twofold. Her only child and a grandchild she would never know. The grief had nearly destroyed her, but the farm had become her lifeline. The rhythms of planting and harvesting, the demands of physical labor, and the tangible results of nurturing living things had gradually pulled her back from the edge of despair. As the years passed, Eleanor had built a new life centered around Pinewood Farm. She had expanded from basic vegetables into specialty herbs and heirloom plants, developing a modest mail-order business that kept the farm financially viable. She had become a respected figure in the local community, known for her quiet generosity and willingness to share her extensive knowledge with younger farmers. But the hole in her heart remained. Every year on the date from the birth certificate, copy she had eventually obtained through persistent research, Eleanor added another small gift to the cedar chest: books, hand-knitted sweaters, carved wooden animals, tokens for a grandson who grew older only in her imagination. Her private searches for information had yielded nothing beyond a heavily redacted adoption record that revealed only that the boy had been placed with a military family. Now, after nearly 4 decades, Eleanor had made her peace with never knowing what had become of her daughter or grandson. She had stopped actively searching 10 years earlier, though she kept the file of information in her bedside table, occasionally reviewing it when the loneliness grew too heavy to bear alone. As the storm reached its peak outside her farmhouse windows, Eleanor had no way of knowing that the answers to questions that had haunted her for a lifetime were literally stumbling through her property, guided by nothing more than desperate need and blind chance. Pinewood Farm had not always been Eleanor's solitary domain. In the early 1970s, she and her husband Thomas had purchased the property with dreams of raising their daughter Sarah in the wholesome environment of rural Montana, far from the tumultuous social landscape of urban America. Thomas, a Vietnam veteran seeking peace after the horrors of war, had found solace in working the land, while Eleanor, a former high school biology teacher, had applied her knowledge to developing sustainable growing methods decades before they became fashionable. The farmhouse walls still held evidence of those golden years, photographs of a robust Thomas Marshall kneeling beside their first successful crop of heirloom tomatoes, his arm proudly draped around a young Eleanor, whose smile revealed none of the lines that now mapped her face. In other frames, a small, dark-haired girl grew from toddler to teenager, her eyes carrying the same determined gleam that Eleanor's still possessed. For 12 years, the family had thrived in their mountain sanctuary. Their small farm had gradually earned a reputation in the region for exceptional produce, grown through methods that respected the delicate balance of Montana's ecosystem. Thomas had constructed the original greenhouse with salvaged materials, teaching himself carpentry through trial and error. Eleanor had meticulously documented their growing techniques in leather-bound journals she still consulted. And Sarah had absorbed it all, her natural affinity for plants suggesting she might someday continue their legacy. Their modest success had allowed them to expand gradually, adding the large barn that still stood sentinel over the property, acquiring the adjacent 20 acres to preserve the watershed that fed their irrigation system, and even saving enough to start a college fund for Sarah's future. The county fair photographs from those years told the story of a family rooted deeply in their land and community. Thomas and Eleanor standing beside blue-ribbon vegetables, Sarah's proud grin revealing her braces as she displayed her award-winning 4-H projects. Summers had meant camping trips to Glacier National Park. Winters had brought cross-country skiing across their property, and evenings spent reading aloud by the fire. The Marshalls had created the life they had envisioned when they first turned off the main highway onto the unpaved road that led to what would become Pinewood Farm. Then came the spring of 1985, when Thomas had collapsed while repairing the tractor. The massive heart attack had killed him before Eleanor could even reach his side. At 44, she had become a widow with a 15-year-old daughter and a farm that demanded constant attention. The college fund had gone to funeral expenses and the emergency replacement of essential equipment. The community had rallied initially, neighboring farmers helping with the heaviest work, church members bringing casseroles and offering prayers. But as weeks turned to months, the casseroles stopped coming, and Eleanor found herself facing the brutal reality of running Pinewood alone. For Sarah, her father's death had torn away not just a beloved parent, but her sense of security in a world that had previously seemed so reliable. The teenager's grief had manifested as anger at the unfairness of loss, at the God her parents had taught her to trust, and increasingly at Eleanor herself. "You're not, Dad," became Sarah's reflexive response to any attempt at parental guidance. The once studious student began skipping classes, her grades plummeting from consistent A's to barely passing. The 4-H ribbons gathered dust as Sarah abandoned the activities that had once defined her relationship with her father. When Eleanor suggested they plant Thomas's favorite sunflowers as a living memorial, Sarah had locked herself in her room for an entire day. By 16, Sarah had discovered a different outlet for her grief, a group of teenagers from neighboring properties who gathered on weekends at the abandoned Wallace homestead to drink beer stolen from their parents' refrigerators, and temporarily escape the constraints of their rural lives. Eleanor had tried everything to redirect her daughter's path: reasoning, punishment, counseling sessions with their pastor, even enrolling her in a summer program for gifted science students that Sarah had once dreamed of attending. Nothing had penetrated the protective shell of rebellion her daughter had constructed. Their arguments had escalated, culminating in an explosive confrontation after Eleanor discovered marijuana in Sarah's backpack. "You've turned this place into a shrine to Dad," Sarah had screamed. "You're not living, you're just maintaining his memory, and you want me to do the same." The words had cut Eleanor deeply because they contained a kernel of truth. She had preserved Thomas's tools exactly as he had left them, had continued to make his favorite meals on Sundays, had even kept his reading glasses on the bedside table. Her grief had transformed into a determination to maintain everything exactly as it had been when he was alive, including expectations for their daughter that perhaps needed to evolve. But before Eleanor could find a way to bridge the growing chasm between them, Sarah had met Jason Reeves. 7 years older than Sarah, with cryptic tattoos and vague references to his time finding himself across the country, Jason had appeared in their small town driving a refurbished 1969 Mustang and taking odd jobs that never seemed to last more than a few weeks. His charisma had captivated many local girls, but it was 17-year-old Sarah he pursued with single-minded determination. Eleanor had recognized the danger immediately, not just the age difference, but the calculated way Jason isolated Sarah from her remaining friends and encouraged her discontent with rural Montana. Their home had become a battleground, with Sarah defending her relationship with increasing ferocity and Eleanor desperately trying to make her daughter see the red flags that were so obvious to her maternal eye. "He actually listens to me," Sarah had insisted during one particularly heated argument. "He doesn't just see me as Dad's replacement or someone to help with the stupid farm." The accusation had stunned Eleanor into temporary silence, creating an opening that Sarah had exploited. "Jason has connections in California, music producers, film people. He says I have what it takes to make it there." "As what?" Eleanor had finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "As anything I want to be, something more than just another farm wife stuck in the middle of nowhere watching life pass by." The contempt in Sarah's voice when she said farm wife had confirmed Eleanor's greatest fear, that her daughter viewed the life they had built together as a prison rather than a legacy. The realization had broken something fundamental between them, a fracture that widened with each subsequent interaction. By Sarah's 18th birthday in early 1988, the situation had become untenable. Jason had been fired from his latest job at the lumber mill for repeated absences, and rumors circulated that he had been selling pills to high school students. Eleanor had made a final desperate attempt to reach her daughter, offering to use what remained of the college fund to send Sarah to the state university where she could pursue her interest in biological sciences. A compromise that would allow her to start fresh without abandoning her potential. Sarah's response had come the following morning, an empty bedroom and a hastily scrawled note. "Going to California with Jason. Don't try to find me. I need to live my own life now." The local sheriff had taken a report, but made it clear that Sarah was legally an adult who had left voluntarily. The Mustang had been spotted crossing the state line into Idaho, but beyond that, the trail had quickly gone cold. For months, Eleanor had maintained Sarah's room exactly as she had left it, convinced that her daughter would return when Jason inevitably revealed his true nature, or their California dreams collapsed under the weight of reality. The postcards had begun arriving sporadically: a Venice Beach sunset, the Hollywood sign, Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco. Each contained only a few lines in Sarah's handwriting. "We're doing fine. Found a place to stay. Got a job at a restaurant." No return address, no phone number, no real information about her circumstances. Eleanor had replied to each one through general delivery at the postmark's locations, her letters growing increasingly desperate for meaningful connection. Most likely, none had ever reached her daughter. Then, after nearly 2 years of this tenuous contact, a collect call had come from a Los Angeles area payphone. Sarah's voice had been almost unrecognizable, thin, hesitant, lacking the defiant confidence that had characterized her departure. "Mom?" The single word had contained volumes of unspoken emotion. "Sarah, where are you? Are you all right?" Eleanor had clutched the phone so tightly, her knuckles whitened. "I'm..." A long pause. "I'm pregnant." Eleanor's heart had leapt with conflicting emotions, concern for her daughter's situation, anger at the circumstances, but also a flicker of hope that this development might bring Sarah home. "Jason left when I told him." Sarah's voice had cracked slightly. "Said it wasn't his, but it is. I'm 5 months along already." "Come home," Eleanor had pleaded, already mentally converting the sewing room into a nursery. "Whatever's happened, we can face it together. Your room is waiting for you." "I can't come back to Montana." The familiar stubbornness had resurfaced in Sarah's tone. "But I need help. I'm almost out of money, and the room I'm renting. I can't stay here much longer." Eleanor had immediately promised to wire money for a bus ticket and living expenses. She had emptied her modest savings account the next morning, sending funds to the Western Union location Sarah had specified, then returned home to prepare for her daughter's return. For 2 weeks, she had cleaned and organized, purchased a crib and baby supplies, even hung new curtains in Sarah's room. She had driven to the bus station in Missoula daily, checking arrivals from California and waiting hours in case Sarah's schedule had changed. Sarah never arrived. 3 months later, a letter had come with no return address, postmarked Seattle. Inside, Eleanor had found a brief note and a small photograph. The image showed a newborn baby, face partially visible, with a distinctive crescent-shaped birthmark behind his right ear, identical to the mark Sarah had been born with, the same mark Eleanor herself carried. The note had been painfully succinct. "I gave birth to a boy on April 17th. I've arranged a private adoption through an agency here. The family seems kind. The father is in the military. I'm sorry for everything, but I can't be what you want me to be, and I can't give this baby what he deserves. Please don't try to find us. I'm starting over completely, and I need you to respect that. Thank you for the money. It helped me get settled here. Goodbye, Mom." Eleanor had read the letter repeatedly, fingers tracing the outline of the infant. In the photograph, searching for glimpses of Thomas in the baby's features, for traces of Sarah, for connections to the family heritage this child would never know. The adoption agency name had been carefully omitted, the details deliberately vague. The only concrete information was the birth date and the small birthmark, the Marshall family signature carried forward into a new generation that would grow up without knowledge of its roots. For months afterward, Eleanor had existed in a fog of grief, her days consumed with futile attempts to track down her grandson through agencies in the Seattle area. The legal barriers had proven insurmountable. Closed adoptions were designed, specifically to prevent the kind of search she desperately wanted to conduct. Without Sarah's cooperation, which the letter had made clear would not be forthcoming, Eleanor had no legal standing to access any information about the child. On the boy's first birthday, a date Eleanor had marked on her kitchen calendar with a small red circle, she had purchased a wooden toy train handcrafted by a local artisan. After wrapping it carefully in blue paper with silver stars, she had placed it in the cedar chest at the foot of her bed, beginning a tradition that would continue for nearly 4 decades. The years had passed with agonizing slowness. Eleanor had gradually rebuilt her life around Pinewood Farm, channeling her grief into creating something meaningful and sustainable. The missing pieces of her heart, Thomas, Sarah, the grandson who grew older only in her imagination, remained. Constant aches that she learned to carry while still moving forward. As Eleanor looked back on those years now, pushing through the blizzard toward the source of the desperate cry for help, she could never have imagined that the brutal Montana storm was about to answer prayers she had long ago stopped believing would be heard. The blizzard intensified around Eleanor as she battled through snowdrifts that had already accumulated to mid-thigh depth in some places. The wind cut through her layers like icy blades, and the heavy snow reduced visibility to mere feet, despite her powerful flashlight. Each step required careful deliberation. One wrong move on this treacherous terrain could leave 2 people fighting for survival instead of 1. "Call out again!" Eleanor shouted into the howling wind, her voice sounding feeble against nature's fury. Max pressed against her leg, his canine senses more reliable than human perception in these conditions. The border collie's ears suddenly perked up, and he lunged forward with purpose, nearly pulling Eleanor off balance. "Easy, boy," she cautioned, though she trusted the dog's instincts implicitly. Max had been her constant companion for 9 years, and his intelligence had proven invaluable during previous emergencies on the isolated property. She followed his lead, navigating around a stand of pine trees that provided momentary shelter. From the driving snow, the cry came again, weaker this time but unmistakably human. Eleanor aimed her flashlight in the direction of the sound and caught a glimpse of something dark against the white landscape. As she moved closer, the beam illuminated a figure half buried in snow beneath the sheltering branches of a large pine. A backpack lay nearby, partially covered by the rapidly accumulating powder. "I'm here," Eleanor called, pushing forward with renewed urgency. "Hold on!" The hiker, a young man from what she could see, lay curled on his side, his body shivering violently. His outdoor gear, though relatively high quality, was insufficient for the brutal conditions of a Montana blizzard. His face was alarmingly pale, where it wasn't reddened by windburn, and his lips had taken on the bluish tinge that signaled advancing hypothermia. "Can you hear me?" Eleanor knelt beside him, immediately recognizing the severity of his condition. The young man's eyes fluttered open briefly, revealing irises of a startling blue-gray that triggered a momentary sense of familiarity she couldn't place, before closing again. "Cold," he managed through chattering teeth. "Can't feel feet." Eleanor's experienced as she unclipped the two-way radio from her belt, another concession to modern technology that her isolated lifestyle had necessitated, and attempted to contact the county emergency services. As she expected, only static answered her call. The mountain often blocked signals during good weather. In a blizzard, communication was impossible. "All right," she said, as much to herself as to the semi-conscious hiker. "We do this the old way." From her emergency kit, Eleanor extracted a thermal blanket, wrapping it securely around the young man. Next came the compact rescue sled, a flexible roll of reinforced material with handles that, when unfolded, could serve as an improvised toboggan. It was designed for exactly this scenario, though she had never actually needed to use it until now. "I need to move you onto this," she explained, doubting he comprehended much in his current state. "It's going to hurt, but it's necessary." With strength born of urgency and decades of physical labor, Eleanor maneuvered the young man onto the rescue sled. He groaned in pain as circulation began returning to his extremities, a positive sign medically, but an agonizing experience. She secured him with the attached straps, ensuring he wouldn't slide off during the difficult journey back to the farmhouse. "Max, home," she commanded. The border collie immediately understood, positioning himself at the front of their small procession, his low-to-the-ground form breaking a path through the snow. Eleanor gripped the sled's handles and began the arduous task of pulling her human cargo through the blizzard. The rope she had secured to the farmhouse door now proved its worth, providing guidance through the whiteout conditions that had rendered the landscape unrecognizable. Every few yards, Eleanor paused to catch her breath, her 72-year-old body protesting the extreme exertion. Each time, she checked the young man's condition. He remained semi-conscious, occasionally mumbling incoherently, but still breathing. The journey that had taken minutes on her outward trek now stretched to nearly an hour as she fought against the storm, the weight of the sled and her own exhaustion. The wind seemed determined to push her backward, the snow to bury her in place. More than once, she stumbled and nearly fell, catching herself only through sheer determination. "Not today," she muttered through gritted teeth as she righted herself. "After a particularly treacherous slip, I didn't survive 40 Montana winters to die in this one." When the dark outline of the farmhouse finally emerged through the swirling whiteness, Eleanor nearly wept with relief. Max barked encouragingly, sensing their sanctuary was near. With a final surge of effort, she dragged the sled up the three. steps to her porch, and managed to get the door open. The blessed warmth of the house enveloped them as Eleanor pulled the sled inside, leaving a trail of melting snow across the kitchen floor. She didn't waste a moment on the mess. Hypothermia demanded immediate intervention. "Stay with me," she ordered the young man, whose shivering had concerning periodic pauses. Working with practiced efficiency, Eleanor cut away his wet outer clothing with trauma shears from her first aid kit. Underneath the soaked hiking gear, he wore a thin thermal layer and, around his neck, military dog tags that clinked metallically as she worked. The sight momentarily froze her hands. Military family. Sarah's letter had said of the people who adopted her grandson, but Eleanor pushed the thought aside. Coincidences happened, and this young man needed immediate care, not distracted attention. She wrapped him in preheated blankets she kept warming by the wood stove for precisely such emergencies, placed hot water bottles at strategic points around his core, never the extremities in hypothermia cases, and elevated his feet slightly. The medical training she had acquired through years of rural living guided her actions with automatic precision. Only when she had done everything possible to stabilize his condition did Eleanor allow herself to truly look at the stranger fate had delivered to her doorstep. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, with dark hair now damp from melting snow and the clean-shaven face of someone who maintained military standards of grooming. His features had a vaguely familiar quality that she attributed to her exhaustion and the emotional weight of the evening's memories. His breathing had steadied somewhat, and color was gradually returning to his face. The dangerously blue tinge of his lips had faded to a more natural hue, small victories but significant ones. Eleanor retrieved his backpack, which she had managed to bring along on the sled, hoping to find identification and emergency contact information. The contents were methodically organized in waterproof compartments, another sign of military training. A wallet contained a Virginia driver's license identifying him as Lieutenant Commander Michael Harrison, age 38, United States Navy, 38. The number struck Eleanor with peculiar force. The same age her grandson would be this year. She pushed the thought away again, focusing on the practical. The driver's license listed an address in Norfolk, the location of a major naval base, she knew. A laminated card provided emergency medical information. No known allergies. Blood type O positive. Emergency contact listed as Admiral James Harrison, father. Next, she found a satellite phone, far more sophisticated than her landline or two-way radio. With hands that suddenly trembled from more than cold and exertion, Eleanor dialed the emergency contact number. After 3 rings, a gruff, authoritative voice answered. "Harrison. Sir, my name is Eleanor Marshall. I'm calling from Pinewood Farm in Montana. Your son Michael is here. He was hiking and got caught in our blizzard. He's suffering from hypothermia, but I've got him stabilized for now." A moment of tense silence followed before the Admiral responded, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "Is he conscious? How severe is his condition?" "Semi-conscious. Stage 2. Hypothermia. Possibly some frostbite in his extremities, but his core temperature is coming up. I've treated him according to wilderness first aid protocols, but he needs proper medical attention as soon as possible." "You sound like you know what you're doing," the Admiral observed, a note of cautious relief entering his voice. "I've lived alone on this mountain for 40 years, sir. You learn what you need to survive." Eleanor hesitated, then added, "The storm is too severe for emergency services to reach us tonight. The nearest hospital is in Missoula, about 70 miles away. Once the blizzard passes, I can get him there." "I'll make some calls," Admiral Harrison stated with the confidence of someone accustomed to making things happen regardless of obstacles. "Search and rescue might be grounded now, but I want a medical evac helicopter ready the moment conditions allow." He paused. "Ms. Marshall, thank you for saving my son's life. Not many people would venture into a blizzard for a stranger." Gratitude in his voice made Eleanor's throat tighten unexpectedly. "Anyone would have done the same," she replied, though they both knew that wasn't true. "I doubt that. Michael was lucky you found him." Another pause. "He's on leave. Was supposed to be taking some time to clear his head after his last deployment. He mentioned hiking in Montana, but didn't share specific plans. Always been independent that way, even as a boy." The casual revelation sent a jolt through Eleanor. "As a boy, you're his father?" "Adoptive father," the admiral clarified, misinterpreting her question. "My late wife, Catherine, and I adopted Michael as an infant. Best decision we ever made. He's been the light of our lives." Eleanor gripped the satellite phone so tightly her knuckles whitened. "Adopted as an infant, military family, 38 years old." The coincidence seemed impossible, yet the evidence was accumulating with each passing moment. "Sir," she began, struggling to keep her voice steady. "When was Michael born?" The question clearly struck Admiral Harrison as odd, but he answered nonetheless. "April 17th, 1987. Why do you ask?" The date, the very day marked in red on every calendar Eleanor had owned for nearly 4 decades, sent a wave of dizziness through her that forced her to sit down abruptly. On the couch before her, the semi-conscious man stirred slightly, his head turning to reveal the right side of his neck, and, just behind his ear, a distinctive crescent-shaped birthmark, exactly matching the one in the faded photograph she had clutched to her heart countless nights. "Ms. Marshall, are you there?" The Admiral's voice sounded distant through the roaring in Eleanor's ears. "Yes," she managed. "I'm here. It's just the storm. Static on the line." The lie came automatically, a defense mechanism against a truth, too overwhelming to process in this moment of crisis. "I'll call you again when his condition changes or if emergency services can get through." After ending the call, Eleanor sat motionless, staring at the man on her couch, no longer a nameless stranger but Michael Harrison, Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy, mother's distinctive birthmark, military adoptive family, born on the exact date her grandson had entered the world. The mathematical probability of such a convergence of factors without significance seemed vanishingly small. Yet Eleanor's scientific mind demanded more evidence, even as her grandmother's heart seemed to recognize something in the young man's. Features that transcended logical analysis. Outside, the blizzard raged with undiminished fury, trapping them together in this moment of suspended revelation. Nature's violence had driven them together. Now it held them in place, while the truth hovered between them, waiting to be acknowledged. The grandfather clock in the corner, Thomas's pride, faithfully maintained for decades, chimed the half-hour, its familiar sound grounding Eleanor in the present moment. Whatever cosmic coincidence or fate had brought this man to her doorstep, his immediate survival remained her primary concern. The larger questions could wait until the storm passed. Eleanor checked Michael's pulse again, stronger now, more regular, and adjusted the blankets around him. As she did, his eyes fluttered open briefly, that same startling blue-gray that had triggered her sense of recognition in the forest. For a moment, their gazes met directly. "Safe now," she told him softly. "Rest." His lips moved slightly, forming what might have been "thank you" before his eyes closed again, his body surrendering to the healing power of sleep. Eleanor settled into the rocking chair beside the couch, prepared to monitor his condition through the night. Max positioned himself protectively at the foot of the couch, his canine instincts sensing the profound importance of the stranger they had rescued. The storm continued its assault on the farmhouse, but inside, something else was brewing. A storm of realization and possibility that would forever alter the landscape of Eleanor Marshall's carefully constructed solitude. Whether by incredible coincidence or the mysterious workings of fate, the grandson she had mourned for 38 years was sleeping under her roof, his life now literally in her hands. Eleanor woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the soft grey light filtering through the farmhouse windows. She had dozed in the rocking chair, her body surrendering to exhaustion despite her intention to keep watch through the night. The grandfather clock showed just past 6 a.m. She had slept for nearly 4 hours. Immediately, her gaze went to the couch where Michael Harrison lay. To her relief, his colour had improved significantly, the dangerous pallor replaced by a healthier tone. His breathing was deep and regular now, and when she placed her fingers against his wrist, his pulse was strong. The crisis point of hypothermia had passed, though recovery would take time. Outside, the blizzard had diminished to steady snowfall, the howling wind replaced by the muffled silence that follows a major storm. Max had maintained his vigil at the foot of the couch, his intelligent eyes tracking Eleanor's movements as she checked on her patient. The border collie's fur was still damp from their rescue mission, but his dedication never wavered. Eleanor patted his head gratefully. "Good boy," she whispered. "We did it." The events of the previous night rushed back, in a flood of conflicting emotions. The evidence pointing to Michael's identity was compelling. The birth date, the military adoptive family, the distinctive birthmark. Yet Eleanor hesitated to embrace the conclusion that seemed increasingly inescapable. Decades of disappointment had taught her to guard against hope, to require absolute certainty before allowing herself to believe. She moved quietly to the kitchen, adding wood to the stove and preparing coffee. The familiar morning ritual provided a measure of normalcy in circumstances that were anything but normal. As the rich aroma filled the kitchen, Eleanor heard movement from the living room, a shifting of blankets, a slight groan. Her heart accelerated as she returned to find Michael Harrison awake, his blue-grey eyes, so startlingly like Thomas's, surveying the unfamiliar surroundings with military alertness, despite his weakened condition. "Good morning," Eleanor said, keeping her voice deliberately calm. "You're safe at Pinewood Farm. I found you in the blizzard last night." Michael attempted to sit up, wincing as circulation returned to his frost-nipped extremities. "I remember a dog," he said, his voice hoarse, "and someone pulling me through the snow." "That would be Max and me," Eleanor confirmed, gesturing to the border collie who had moved to the couch, tail wagging cautiously. "You were suffering from severe hypothermia. Another hour out there, and we wouldn't be having this conversation." Recognition flickered across his face. "You saved my life." "Anyone would have done the same," Eleanor replied, echoing her words to his father the night before. "No," Michael countered with quiet certainty. "They wouldn't have. Not many people would venture into a storm like that for a stranger." His gaze took in the room, the well-worn furniture, the handmade quilts, the photographs on the walls, before returning to Eleanor with newfound clarity. "I'm in your debt, Ms. Marshall," she supplied. "Eleanor Marshall." "Lieutenant Commander Michael Harrison," he responded automatically, the military identification clearly ingrained by years of service. He attempted to rise again, this time succeeding with obvious effort. "I need to contact my father. He'll be worried." "Already taken care of," Eleanor assured him, helping steady his balance. "I found your satellite phone last night and called Admiral Harrison. He's arranging a medical evacuation once the weather clears." Relief washed over Michael's features. "Thank you. My father's efficient when it comes to situations like this." Smile tugged at Eleanor's lips despite her internal turmoil. "I gathered that from our conversation. Coffee?" "Please," Michael accepted gratefully. Eleanor busied herself pouring 2 mugs, using the moment to compose herself. When she returned, Michael had managed to wrap one of the blankets around his shoulders and was cautiously testing his mobility. His feet and hands showed the reddened, swollen signs of mild frostbite, but thankfully no evidence of the tissue death that characterized severe cases. "The coffee will help warm you from the inside," Eleanor explained, handing him a steaming mug. "You should also try to eat something. I've got oatmeal nearly ready." Michael accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "I wasn't expecting the storm to hit so early or so hard," he said after taking a sip. "The forecast called for snow, but not a full blizzard until tonight. I was trying to reach Wilderness Cabin, supposed to be about 10 miles east of here. Lost the trail when visibility dropped." "The mountain weather is notoriously unpredictable," Eleanor replied, settling into the chair opposite him. "Forecasts are more like suggestions up here. Locals know to prepare for the worst, even on clear days." "Lesson learned," Michael acknowledged ruefully, "though not the way I'd have chosen to learn it." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and Max's contented sigh as he settled at Michael's feet, apparently having decided the stranger was now worthy of his full approval. Eleanor used the pause to study Michael more carefully, searching for traces of Sarah in his features, the shape of his nose, the set of his jaw. There was something of Thomas there too, in the thoughtful furrow of his brow as he gazed into the fire. "Have you lived here long?" Michael finally asked, his eyes taking in the farmhouse with renewed interest. "About 40 years, Eleanor replied. "My husband Thomas and I bought this place in the early 70s. We wanted somewhere our daughter could grow up connected to the land." "It's beautiful," Michael observed, gesturing toward the window where the cleared storm revealed the snow-blanketed landscape and the distant mountains. "Peaceful, different from anywhere I've lived." "Where have you lived?" Eleanor asked, unable to resist gathering information about the life her grandson might have led. If indeed this man was her grandson. "Everywhere and nowhere," Michael smiled. "Navy brat turned Navy officer. Virginia, California, Hawaii, Japan, Italy. Wherever the Navy sent my father and later, wherever they sent me." "Your father mentioned you were on leave after a deployment?" Michael nodded, a shadow crossing his features. "Afghanistan. My team was involved in the evacuation last year. It was challenging. My commanding officer suggested some time off. To decompress." The weight behind his words suggested experiences too heavy to share with a stranger. Eleanor recognized the careful language of someone accustomed to carrying burdens alone, a trait she understood intimately. "So you chose Montana for your leave?" she asked, steering toward safer terrain. "I wanted somewhere different from anywhere I'd been," Michael explained, his expression lightening. "Somewhere without crowds or deadlines or missions, just open space and silence." He laughed softly. Though nearly freezing to death wasn't part of the plan, Eleanor rose to check on the oatmeal, using the mundane task to calm her racing thoughts. As she stirred the pot, she considered her options. She could continue this casual conversation, learning about Michael's life while keeping her suspicions to herself. Or she could confront the situation directly, ask the questions burning in her heart, risk the possibility of confirmation or denial. The satellite phone on the counter rang, interrupting her deliberation. She handed it to Michael, who answered with automatic military precision. "Harrison." His voice shifted immediately to a respectful but familiar tone. "Yes, sir, I'm all right. Ms. Marshall's expertise prevented any serious damage." He listened for a moment, his eyes meeting Eleanor's with a grateful expression. "Understood. I'll be ready." After ending the call, Michael explained, "The weather's clearing faster than expected. Search and Rescue has a helicopter preparing to launch from Missoula within the hour. My father's arranged for me to be transported to the military hospital at Mountain Home Air Force Base in Idaho." Eleanor nodded, ignoring the twinge of disappointment that their time together would be so brief. "That's good news. You should still have medical attention for those extremities, and they'll want to monitor for after effects of the hypothermia." "He also asked to speak with you again," Michael added, holding out the phone. "I think he wants to thank you personally." Eleanor accepted the phone, stepping into the kitchen for privacy, When she answered, Admiral Harrison's voice carried the unmistakable gratitude of a parent whose child has been spared. "Ms. Marshall, I can't thank you enough for what you've done. The medical team is preparing to depart Missoula now. They should reach your location within 90 minutes, weather permitting." "He's doing well," Eleanor assured him. "Much improved since last night. Thanks entirely to your intervention." The Admiral paused. "Ms. Marshall, if I may, your question last night about Michael's birth date, it seemed significant to you. May I ask why?" The directness of the inquiry caught Eleanor unprepared. She hesitated, struggling to formulate a response that wouldn't reveal too much, yet wouldn't be dishonest. "It's a personal matter," she finally said. "Something I'd prefer to discuss in person, if that's possible." Another pause, longer this time. When the Admiral spoke again, his tone had shifted from grateful to cautiously guarded. "Ms. Marshall, are you by any chance related to a Sarah Marshall?" The question stole the breath from Eleanor's lungs. "She's my daughter," she managed after a moment. The silence that followed felt weighted with decades of secrets and possibilities. When Admiral Harrison spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. "I think we have much to discuss. I'm flying to Mountain Home myself. Should arrive shortly after Michael. Would you consider joining us there? I can arrange transportation." "Yes," Eleanor replied, the single word containing all her hope and fear. "I would like that very much." After ending the call, Eleanor returned to the living room, where Michael had managed to stand and was cautiously testing his balance. He looked up at her approach, his expression curious. "Everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." The irony of his casual comment nearly broke through Eleanor's carefully maintained composure. In many ways, she was seeing a ghost, the living embodiment of a connection she had believed permanently severed. "Your father has invited me to visit you at the hospital," she explained, settling for a partial truth. "He wants to thank me properly." Michael smiled. "That sounds like him. The Admiral believes in acknowledging debts." His gaze turned thoughtful. "I'd like that too. I owe you my life, Ms. Marshall. That's not something I take lightly." Eleanor began gathering supplies for Michael's imminent evacuation. Extra blankets, a thermos of hot tea, the antibiotics she kept for emergencies. Each item was selected, with the careful attention of someone focusing on practical matters to avoid confronting emotional ones. "You don't seem surprised," Michael observed, watching her methodical preparations. "About the helicopter, the military hospital, all of it. Most civilians would have questions. I was married to a Vietnam veteran," Eleanor replied simply. "I understand how the military operates, especially when it comes to taking care of their own." The answer satisfied Michael, but it wasn't the complete truth. Eleanor wasn't surprised because, for the first time in decades, events were unfolding with a sense of rightness, of pieces falling into their proper places after years of disorder. If this man truly was her grandson, and the Admiral's question about Sarah all but confirmed it, then his appearance in her life defied coincidence. Some force beyond rational explanation had guided him to her property on this particular night, during this particular storm. As the sound of an approaching helicopter began to penetrate the morning stillness, Eleanor found herself studying Michael's features one last time before their interrupted reunion would continue at the hospital. The shape of his eyes, the set of his shoulders, the thoughtful furrow of his brow, all echoed the genetics of the Marshall family, subtle signposts she might have missed if she weren't looking so desperately for them. The moment of parting approached rapidly as the helicopter's sound grew louder. Soon he would be gone from her home, whisked away to medical care. The revelation that might change both their lives remained unspoken, suspended between them like the snowflakes now gently falling outside. Eleanor realized with sudden clarity that whatever came next Confirmation, denial, reunion, rejection. The solitary life she had carefully constructed over 4 decades had already been irrevocably altered. The simple act of helping a stranger in a blizzard had set in motion events that would redefine her understanding of family, fate, and the possibility of second chances. Outside, the helicopter descended into the clearing beside the barn, its rotors sending swirls of fresh snow dancing across the pristine white landscape of Pinewood Farm. Creating these real-life reunion stories takes countless hours of research, interviews, and careful crafting to bring you the authentic experiences that remind us of the mysterious connections that bind us together through time and distance. We believe these stories matter. They're the extraordinary moments when fate intervenes in ways that defy logical explanation, reuniting people who were meant to find each other despite seemingly impossible odds. If this story of unexpected reunion and second chances resonates with you, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and notification bell. Your support allows us to continue documenting these remarkable human connections that might otherwise go untold. We read every comment, so let us know your thoughts below. Have you experienced a moment of inexplicable synchronicity in your own life? Do you believe some people are destined to find each other no matter what obstacles separate them? And many viewers have asked how we discover these incredible stories. While we occasionally find them through news reports or social media, many, like Eleanor and Michael's remarkable reunion, come to us directly from the people who experienced them. If you know of an extraordinary story of unexpected connection or reunion that deserves to be shared, there's a link in the description for submissions. For those of you who've been with us since the beginning of this channel, you know these stories are more than just content, they're our passion and mission. For new viewers, welcome to our community of people who believe in the power of human connection and the possibility that some reunions are written in the stars. And now, let's return to Eleanor and Michael as they travel separate paths toward a hospital where decades of questions might finally find answers. What neither of them yet realizes is that their journey toward truth will face unexpected obstacles from someone who believes the past should remain buried. The military helicopter lifted away from Pinewood Farm, carrying Michael Harrison toward the specialized medical care he needed. Eleanor watched from her porch until the aircraft disappeared over the mountain ridge, Max sitting loyally at her feet. Only when the sound of rotors had completely faded did she move inside to prepare for her own journey. Admiral Harrison's assistant had called moments after the helicopter's departure with detailed instructions. A military vehicle would arrive within 2 hours to transport Eleanor to Missoula Regional Airport, where a small private jet would be waiting to fly her directly to Mountain Home Air Force Base in Idaho. The efficiency of the arrangement spoke volumes about the Admiral's resources and his urgency to speak with her. Eleanor moved through her home with practiced efficiency, packing essentials for what might be several days away. In 40 years, she had rarely left Pinewood Farm for more than a day at a time. The property was her sanctuary, her purpose, her connection to the past. Leaving it felt momentous, as if she were closing one chapter of her life before another could begin. As she packed, Eleanor's hands found their way to the locked drawer in her bedside table. Inside lay the small box containing her most precious possessions: Sarah's birth certificate, the tattered photograph of her infant grandson, with his distinctive birthmark, and the few postcards her daughter had sent before disappearing completely. She added these items to her suitcase, uncertain whether she would need them, but unwilling to leave them behind. Next, she wrote detailed care instructions for Mabel Jenkins, her nearest neighbor 5 miles down the mountain, who would look after the livestock and Max during her absence. The border collie would have preferred to accompany her, but Eleanor knew the coming conversations would be complicated enough without adding a dog to the equation. "I'll be back soon," she promised Max, kneeling to embrace the faithful companion who had helped save her grandson's life. "Mabel will take good care of you." The sound of a vehicle negotiating her snow-covered driveway drew Eleanor to the window. The expected military transport had arrived, a rugged SUV with government plates driven by a young woman in uniform. What Eleanor hadn't expected was the second vehicle following close behind, a familiar silver sedan that sent an unwelcome chill through her body that had nothing to do with the winter temperature. Eleanor opened her front door as both vehicles parked. From the military SUV emerged a female Army corporal who introduced herself as Corporal Jessica Ramirez, there to transport Ms. Marshall as arranged by Admiral Harrison. From the silver sedan emerged a woman in her early 60s, expensively dressed, her face a carefully maintained mask of professional concern. "Diane," Eleanor acknowledged coldly. "This is unexpected." "Eleanor," the woman replied with forced warmth, "when I heard about your situation, I had to come immediately." "Corporal," Eleanor turned to the young soldier, "would you mind bringing my suitcase from the bedroom? It's just inside the door, packed and ready." Once the corporal had entered the house, Eleanor faced her unwelcome visitor directly. "How did you find out, Diane? And what exactly are you doing here?" Diane Rollins, attorney, Eleanor's second cousin by marriage, and the executor of Thomas's estate, adjusted her designer scarf against the cold. "The hospital in Missoula called me as your emergency contact when they received a transfer request for your medical records. Something about you visiting a military hospital? Naturally, I was concerned. The explanation made practical sense, but Eleanor knew better than to take Diane's concern at face value. Their relationship had been strained for decades, ever since Thomas's death, when Diane had suggested, none too subtly, that Eleanor might be better off selling Pinewood and moving to assisted living in town. As both family member and lawyer, Diane had positioned herself as the practical voice of reason against what she viewed as Eleanor's stubborn, impractical attachment to the farm. "I'm not ill, if that's your concern," Eleanor stated flatly. "I'm visiting someone who was injured on my property. The admiral arranged transportation." "Admiral?" Diane's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. "Eleanor, you're not making sense. What admiral? And why would you be going all the way to Idaho for a simple Good Samaritan visit? It's not like you to leave the farm." The questions were delivered with calculated precision, probing for information while conveying the subtle suggestion that Eleanor might not be thinking clearly. It was a familiar dynamic, one that had intensified as Eleanor aged, with Diane increasingly positioning herself as the responsible overseer of her elderly cousin's affairs. "I don't have time to explain," Eleanor replied, seeing Corporal Ramirez returning with her suitcase. "I have a plane to catch." "Eleanor?" Diane lowered her voice, stepping closer. "You're 72 years old, traveling alone to a military base in another state in the middle of winter. As your family and your legal representative, I'm concerned about your decision-making. Perhaps we should discuss this before you go rushing off." The condescension in Diane's tone ignited a familiar anger in Eleanor. Since Thomas's death, Diane had made it clear she viewed Pinewood as a potential real estate opportunity rather than a family legacy. Her persistent suggestions that Eleanor consider her options had become more frequent as property values in the area increased, with developers eager to acquire pristine mountain acreage. "My decision-making is perfectly sound," Eleanor replied evenly, "and this is not a discussion that requires your input, legal or otherwise." Diane's professional smile tightened. "When it could affect your estate and well-being, I believe it does. What's really going on here, Eleanor? Who are you visiting that's so important you'd abandon your precious farm in the middle of winter? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications. Eleanor considered her response carefully. Diane knew nothing about Sarah's pregnancy or the grandson given for adoption. Eleanor had kept those painful secrets closely guarded, sharing them with no one in the community. If Diane somehow learned that Eleanor might have located her long-lost grandson, she would undoubtedly find some way to complicate matters, possibly even contesting Eleanor's mental capacity to make decisions about her legacy. "A hiker was caught in the blizzard on my property last night," Eleanor explained, offering the simplest version of the truth. "I rescued him, and now his father, who happens to be a naval officer, has invited me to visit while he recovers. It's a simple courtesy, nothing more. A simple courtesy doesn't involve private jets and military escorts," Diane countered skeptically. "Eleanor, if there's something happening with your property or your financial situation, I need to know. As your attorney, you're my cousin's widow, who happens to be an attorney," Eleanor interrupted, her patience wearing thin. "Not my guardian or keeper. Now, if you'll excuse me, Corporal Ramirez and I have a schedule to maintain." Diane's face hardened momentarily before she recovered her professional demeanor. "Of course, but we'll need to have a serious conversation. When you return, there are estate matters that have been postponed too long already." The implicit threat wasn't lost on Eleanor. For years, Diane had been pushing for updates to Eleanor's will and estate plan, updates that would likely involve provisions for selling Pinewood rather than preserving it, with Diane's law firm handling the lucrative transaction. "I'm sure we will," Eleanor replied neutrally. "Max will be staying with Mabel Jenkins. There's a spare key under the blue flower pot if you need to check on anything." The information was offered as an olive branch, though Eleanor knew Diane well enough to realize she might use the access to snoop through the farmhouse in her absence. It was a calculated risk. Better to appear cooperative than to heighten Diane's suspicions further. As Eleanor settled into the military vehicle, she watched Diane remain in the driveway, phone already in hand, undoubtedly making calls to gather more information about the situation. The woman's appearance was not coincidental, and her interest went beyond professional concern. Something about the timing felt deliberate, as if Diane had been waiting for an opportunity to intervene in Eleanor's affairs. "Everything okay, ma'am?" Corporal Ramirez asked as they pulled away from the farm. "Just family complications," Eleanor replied, watching Pinewood recede in the side mirror. "Nothing unusual." But as they navigated the snowy mountain road toward Missoula, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that Diane's unexpected appearance was the first sign of opposition to a reunion nearly 4 decades in the making. The lawyer had always been possessive of her role as Eleanor's closest remaining family connection, a position that granted her significant influence over potential inheritance of the increasingly valuable Pinewood property. If Diane somehow discovered that Eleanor had found her grandson, a direct blood descendant with a potential claim to the family legacy, her carefully cultivated influence would be threatened. For years, Diane had subtly positioned herself as Eleanor's only family, the logical inheritor of whatever remained after the impractical farm was sold. The existence of a direct Marshall descendant would upend those calculations entirely. Eleanor pushed these concerns aside as they approached Missoula. The immediate priority was reaching Michael and Admiral Harrison, establishing the truth of her grandson's identity, and beginning the process of reconnection. Diane's machinations, whatever they might be, were a secondary concern at best. Yet as the small private jet lifted off from Missoula Regional Airport, carrying Eleanor toward a reunion decades in the making, she couldn't entirely dismiss the nagging worry that something important had been set in motion by Diane's appearance. The journey toward reconnection with her grandson now faced not only the emotional complexities of their long separation, but also the potential interference of someone with a vested interest in keeping them apart. The jet banked southward, leaving Montana's snow-covered mountains behind. Below, the landscape transformed gradually from wilderness to the more populated regions of Idaho. Eleanor watched the changing view through her window, struck by how it mirrored her own journey, from isolation toward connection, from the familiar toward the unknown. In a few hours, she would meet Admiral Harrison face to face and hopefully confirm beyond any doubt that Michael was indeed her grandson. The prospect filled her with both anticipation and apprehension. What would she say to him? How could anyone explain a lifetime of separation in a single conversation? Would he welcome the revelation of his biological heritage, or would it upend the identity he had constructed over 38 years? These questions circled in Eleanor's mind as the jet began its descent toward Mountain Home Air Force Base. Whatever answers awaited her there, one thing was certain: the solitary life she had carefully maintained for decades was transforming with each passing moment. Whether that transformation would bring healing or new forms of heartbreak remained to be seen. As the aircraft touched down on the military runway, Eleanor steeled herself for whatever might come next. Somewhere in the hospital ahead, Michael Harrison was recovering from his near-fatal encounter with the Montana wilderness, unaware that the elderly woman who had saved his life was connected to him by bonds far deeper than chance or circumstance. The journey that had begun with a cry for help in a blizzard was about to enter its most challenging phase, one that would test not only Eleanor's courage, but also her understanding of what family truly means. Mountain Home Air Force Base presented a stark contrast to the isolated tranquility of Pinewood Farm. The ordered efficiency of military operations surrounded Eleanor as her escort, now a young Air Force lieutenant, guided her through security checkpoints toward the base hospital. The facility itself was modern and immaculate, its corridors bustling with uniformed personnel and medical staff. Eleanor followed her guide with outward composure, though her heart raced with each step closer to the meeting that might confirm what she already believed in her soul. She had waited 38 years for this moment, had imagined it in countless variations during sleepless nights and solitary days working her land. Now that it was imminent, she found herself uncharacteristically uncertain, questioning whether she had the right to disrupt Michael's life with revelations about a biological heritage he had never known. "Ms. Marshall," the lieutenant's voice drew her from her thoughts. "Admiral Harrison is waiting for you in the conference room. Lieutenant Commander Harrison is still undergoing treatment, but he's stable and responding well." Eleanor nodded her. "Thanks," taking a moment to collect herself before entering the room. Through the glass wall, she could see a distinguished man in his late 60s, wearing a naval uniform adorned with the insignia of a rear admiral. His bearing was military precise even while seated, his silver hair cut in the regulation style that Michael shared. Admiral James Harrison rose as Eleanor entered, his expression a carefully controlled mixture of professional courtesy and personal concern. Up close, she could see the fatigue in his eyes, evidence of overnight travel and a father's worry for his son. "Ms. Marshall," he extended his hand. "I'm Admiral James Harrison. Thank you for coming all this way. And more importantly, thank you for saving my son's life." Eleanor shook his hand, studying the man who had raised her grandson. Despite his formal demeanor, there was genuine warmth in his eyes, a humanity that military discipline hadn't erased. "How is he?" she asked simply. "Recovering well," the admiral replied, gesturing for her to take a seat. "The doctors say he avoided severe frostbite thanks to your prompt intervention. They're keeping him for observation because of the hypothermia, but he should be released tomorrow." "I'm glad to hear it," Eleanor said sincerely. "He seems strong, resilient." "He is," Admiral Harrison agreed, a father's pride evident in his voice. Michael has always been exceptional. Even as a child, he showed remarkable determination and adaptability. The mention of Michael's childhood created an opening, but Eleanor hesitated to walk through it immediately. Instead, she allowed a moment of silence to settle between them, giving the Admiral space to guide the conversation toward the subject they both knew must be addressed. Admiral Harrison studied her with the assessing gaze of someone accustomed to evaluating situations and people quickly. Ms. Marshall, I think we both understand that there's more to discuss here than my son's fortunate rescue. Eleanor nodded, appreciating his directness. Yes, Admiral. I believe there is. He reached into his uniform pocket and removed a folded document, placing it carefully on the table between them. This is a copy of my son's adoption record, the portion I'm legally permitted to possess. It confirms he was born on April 17th, 1987, in Seattle, Washington, and placed for adoption through Pacific Northwest Family Services. Eleanor's throat tightened at the official confirmation of what she had suspected. My daughter Sarah gave birth to a son on April 17th, 1987, in Seattle. She arranged a private adoption through an agency there, telling me only that the adoptive family was military. The Admiral nodded slowly. When you asked about Michael's birth date during our first call, and then mentioned your daughter's name was Sarah Marshall, I knew this wasn't mere coincidence. No, Eleanor agreed quietly. Not coincidence. Admiral. Harrison leaned forward slightly. Ms. Marshall, I need to be certain. Do you have anything that would conclusively establish this connection? The adoption was closed at the birth mother's request, with minimal identifying information shared. Eleanor opened her purse and carefully removed the small envelope she had carried across state lines. From it, she extracted the faded photograph of an infant with a distinctive crescent-shaped birthmark behind his right ear. This is the only picture Sarah sent me of her baby, she explained, placing it beside the adoption record. The birthmark is identical to the one Michael has. It's a genetic trait in our family. Sarah has it, and so do I. She pushed her silver hair away from her right ear, revealing the same crescent shape. Admiral Harrison examined the photograph, his military composure momentarily faltering as he recognized the distinctive mark his son had carried since birth. I always wondered about that birthmark, he said softly. Catherine, my late wife, used to say it was shaped like a crescent moon, a sign he was meant for great things. A lump formed in Eleanor's throat at this intimate glimpse into Michael's childhood. Your wife sounds like she was a wonderful mother. She was, the Admiral confirmed, his voice warm with memory. Catherine couldn't have children of her own, a medical condition from childhood. When the adoption agency contacted us about a baby boy available for immediate placement, it felt like a miracle. We were stationed in San Diego then. I had just received my first command. We flew to Seattle that same day to meet him. He looked up, meeting Eleanor's gaze directly. Catherine held him for the first time and said he was always meant to be ours, that somehow the universe had created him especially for our family. The sincerity in his voice moved Eleanor deeply. This man and his wife had given her grandson everything she would have wanted for him: love, security, opportunity, and unwavering support. The ache of having missed those years remained, but it was now tempered with profound gratitude. Thank you, she said simply. The Admiral looked surprised. For what? For being his parents when I couldn't be there, for giving him a good life. Eleanor's voice remained steady, despite the emotion behind her words. Sarah was barely 19 when Michael was born. She wasn't ready to be a mother. And I was broken in many ways after losing both my husband and then my daughter. Your family gave Michael what we couldn't at that time. Admiral Harrison studied her thoughtfully. May I ask what happened? Why your daughter chose adoption. The agency told us almost nothing about the birth family, only that the mother was young and believed adoption was in the baby's best interest. Eleanor hadn't spoken Sarah's full story aloud in decades, but sharing it now felt necessary, a bridge between past and present, between the family that had raised Michael and the roots he had never known. Sarah was our only child, she began, her voice taking on the measured cadence of someone navigating painful memories with care. She was 15 when her father, my husband Thomas, died suddenly of a heart attack. His death changed her. She became rebellious, angry, pulling away from everything that reminded her of him, including me and the farm we'd built together. Admiral Harrison listened intently as Eleanor recounted Sarah's relationship with Jason, her departure for California, and finally, the desperate phone call revealing her pregnancy and abandoned state. I sent her money for a bus ticket home, Eleanor continued, the old pain evident in her voice. Prepared the house for her return, bought supplies for the baby. I waited at the bus station day after day, but she never arrived. She went to Seattle instead, the Admiral supplied, filling in the missing piece. Eleanor nodded. 3 months later, I received a letter with no return address. Sarah had given birth and arranged a private adoption. She included one photograph of the baby, this photograph, and wrote that the adoptive family seemed kind, that the father was in the military. She asked me not to search for either of them. Said she was starting a new life and wanted to leave the past behind completely. Have you had any contact with her since? The Admiral asked gently. None, Eleanor admitted. I hired private investigators over the years, but Sarah disappeared completely. The adoption agency refused to provide any information about the baby. Eventually, I had to accept that my daughter didn't want to be found and that my grandson was beyond my reach. The admission hung in the air between them, the decades of separation, the parallel lives that had somehow converged through what seemed like impossible coincidence. And yet here we are, Admiral Harrison said finally, his tone suggesting he was still processing the extraordinary circumstance himself. Of all the places in Montana where Michael could have been hiking, he crossed your property during a blizzard. Of all the people who might have found him, it was his biological grandmother. I don't believe in coincidences of this magnitude, Eleanor said quietly. Do you, Admiral? He considered the question with military thoroughness before answering. My career has been built on strategic planning, on controlling variables and minimizing chance. But there have been moments, rare ones, when events aligned in ways that defied logical explanation. He gestured to the documents between them. This would certainly qualify as one of those moments. A silence fell between them, not uncomfortable, but weighted with the significance of their shared discovery. Finally, Admiral Harrison addressed the question they had both been circling. What do you want from this connection, Ms. Marshall? I need to be clear about your intentions toward my son. The directness didn't offend Eleanor. In fact, she appreciated his protective instinct. I want whatever Michael wants, she answered honestly. If he wishes to know about his biological heritage, I'm ready to share that with him. If he prefers to acknowledge the connection but maintain distance, I'll respect that choice. And if he decides he wants no relationship at all... She paused, the possibility painful, but one she had to acknowledge. I'll accept that too. I've lived with his absence for 38 years. I can continue to do so, if that's what's best for him. The Admiral studied her, his experienced eyes searching for any sign of deception or hidden agenda. Finding none, his posture relaxed slightly. I believe you mean that. Not everyone in your position would be so measured. I've had decades to consider what might happen if this day ever came, Eleanor explained. To imagine how I would feel, what I would want, The only conclusion I ever reached was that Michael's well-being must come first. He didn't ask for any of this, not the adoption, not the separation, and certainly not this unexpected revelation about his origins. Admiral Harrison nodded, seemingly satisfied with her response. Michael has always known he was adopted. Catherine and I believed in honesty from the beginning. We told him age-appropriate versions of what little we knew, that his birth mother was very young, that she wanted him to have opportunities she couldn't provide. We made it clear that her choice came from love, not rejection. Eleanor felt a rush of gratitude toward this man and his late wife. They had shielded Michael from the pain of abandonment, had given him a narrative that preserved his dignity and sense of worth. "Thank you for that gift," she said sincerely. It was more than he might have received from many adoptive families. It wasn't entirely altruistic, the Admiral admitted. The military life isn't easy on children. Constant relocations, a parent often deployed to dangerous places. We wanted Michael to feel secure in his identity, to know that he belonged with us by choice rather than accident of birth. And did he, Eleanor couldn't help asking, feel secure? A smile touched the Admiral's face, warming his formal demeanor. Very much so. Michael thrived in our family. He adapted to each new posting with remarkable resilience, made friends easily, excelled academically. When he decided to follow me into the Navy, it was entirely his choice. I was careful never to pressure him. He's built an exemplary career on his own merits. Pride radiated from Admiral Harrison as he spoke about his son, and Eleanor found herself grateful once again that Michael had landed in a family that valued and nurtured him so completely. "The question now," the Admiral continued, his expression turning serious, "is how to proceed with this information. Michael is still recovering, and I'm reluctant to introduce potentially distressing news during his medical treatment." Eleanor nodded in agreement. "I understand completely. This revelation shouldn't come while he's vulnerable. It needs to be his choice, when and if he wants to hear it." The Admiral's estimation of Eleanor seemed to rise further with this response. "I propose the following. I'll tell Michael that you've arrived at the base and would like to visit him. Tomorrow, once he's had more time to recover, I won't mention our discovery yet. That will give you both a chance to interact again, and it will give me an opportunity to assess his state of mind." "That seems wise," Eleanor agreed. "What then?" "If he seems strong enough, I'll talk with him privately about what we've learned. I'll make it clear that you're making no demands, that you're prepared to respect whatever boundaries he wishes to establish." The Admiral paused. "And then, if he's willing, you can have a conversation with the truth between you." Eleanor felt a wave of emotion at the prospect, finally speaking to her grandson with full knowledge of their connection. "I would be grateful for that opportunity, whatever comes of it." Admiral Harrison rose, signaling that the formal part of their conversation was concluding. "The base has arranged accommodation for you in our VIP quarters. My aide will escort you there now. I'll be with Michael for the remainder of the day, and I'll contact you this evening with an update on his condition and our plans for tomorrow." Eleanor stood as well, gathering her documents with careful hands. Before she turned to leave, the Admiral spoke again, his tone more personal than it had been throughout their meeting. "Ms. Marshall, there's something else you should know about Michael. After his most recent deployment, he's been searching, taking this hiking trip, seeking solitude in the wilderness. It's part of a pattern I've observed since his return from Afghanistan. He's questioning his path forward, looking for connections beyond his military career." The Admiral met her gaze directly. "I tell you this because regardless of how he initially responds to this news, he may need the connection you represent, more than either of you realize. The insight into Michael's current state of mind was both unexpected and valuable." "Thank you for sharing that, Admiral. It helps me understand the context better." As Eleanor followed the aide toward her quarters, Her mind worked through the implications of everything she had learned. Confirmation that Michael was indeed her grandson brought both joy and trepidation. Tomorrow would bring their real reunion, one with full awareness on her part and potentially on his as well. What that reunion might mean for both their futures remained uncertain, but Eleanor felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in decades. Whatever happened next, the unbearable weight of not knowing, of wondering where her grandson was, if he was safe, if he was loved, had been lifted. Michael Harrison had grown into a man of honor and courage, had been raised by parents who cherished him, and had forged his own path with determination. For tonight, that knowledge was enough. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Michael Harrison's hospital room as he sat on the edge of his bed, testing his mobility with cautious movements. Despite the doctor's recommendation for a full day of rest, the lieutenant commander was already focused on regaining his strength. The same discipline that had earned him commendations throughout his military career now applied to his recovery. Knock at the door interrupted his exercises. "Enter!" he called, the simple word carrying the automatic authority of military habit. Admiral James Harrison stepped in, his uniform impeccable despite having spent much of the night in conversation with Eleanor and base commanders. The concern in his eyes belied his composed exterior. "You look better," the admiral observed. "Feeling better," Michael confirmed. "Doctor says I'm recovering faster than expected." He studied his father's expression. "You didn't fly halfway across the country just to check if I'm following doctor's orders. What's going on?" The admiral pulled a chair closer, an unusual action that signaled the personal nature of the conversation to come. "Michael, I need to discuss something important with you. Something unexpected has come to light regarding your adoption." Michael stilled. Though he had always known he was adopted, the subject rarely arose in their family discussions. "What about it?" he asked cautiously. "Ms. Marshall, the woman who rescued you from the blizzard, arrived at the base yesterday at my invitation," the admiral began. "During our conversation, we made a discovery that concerns you directly." He paused, uncharacteristically searching for words. "Michael, there's evidence suggesting that Eleanor Marshall is your biological grandmother." The statement hung in the air, its implications expanding to fill the sterile hospital room. Michael's expression remained carefully controlled, though his shoulders tensed visibly. "Evidence?" he finally asked, the single word containing multiple layers of meaning. Admiral Harrison explained the extraordinary convergence of details: the birth date, the Seattle adoption, the military family placement, and most convincingly, the distinctive, crescent-shaped birthmark that connected Michael to Eleanor's family line. Michael moved to the window, his back to his father, as he processed this revelation. "My birth mother, her daughter, is she here too?" he asked without turning. "No," the admiral replied gently. "According to Ms. Marshall, she hasn't had contact with her daughter Sarah since before your birth. The adoption was arranged without her knowledge or consent. She's been searching for you for 38 years. Michael turned, his expression a complex mixture of emotions held in careful check. 38 years. And she finds me because I happened to get caught in a blizzard on her property in Montana." A humorless laugh escaped him. "That's quite a coincidence. I said the same thing," the admiral acknowledged. "Ms. Marshall doesn't believe it was coincidence. Neither do I, frankly." The admission from his practical, logical father stunned Michael more than the revelation itself. "You think it was fate? That's not like you, sir." "I think," Admiral Harrison said carefully, "that some connections transcend our understanding. Your mother, Catherine, used to say that about you. That you were meant to find us, that it wasn't random chance that brought you into our lives." He paused. Perhaps she was right in ways none of us could have anticipated. The mention of his adoptive mother softened something in Michael's expression. "What does Ms. Marshall want?" he asked, his tone neutral again. "Only what you're willing to give," his father replied. "She's prepared to leave immediately if you prefer not to engage with this discovery, or to establish whatever boundaries make you comfortable if you decide to acknowledge the connection." Michael returned to sit on the edge of the bed, processing this information with methodical thoroughness. "You've spoken with her at length? Assessed her intentions?" The admiral nodded, understanding the unspoken question. "I have. She strikes me as a woman of remarkable integrity. She harbors no resentment toward your birth mother for the adoption decision, nor does she seem interested in making claims or demands based on your biological connection. But she wants to meet me, knowing who I am to her." "Yes," the admiral confirmed. "She would like that opportunity, but only with your full consent." Michael fell silent, his gaze fixed on some middle distance. All his life, the fact of his adoption had been present but rarely examined, a piece of personal history that seemed to have little relevance to the man he had become. His identity had been shaped by the Harrison name, by the military tradition he had embraced, by the values his parents had instilled. Yet in quiet moments, particularly since returning from Afghanistan, he had occasionally found himself wondering about the biological connections that had created him. The questions had intensified during his wilderness hike, as if the vastness of Montana's landscape had created space for them to expand. "I want to meet with her," Michael decided, his tone suggesting the decision had crystallized during their conversation. "I owe her my life twice over now, once for the adoption she didn't prevent, and once for the rescue that saved me from the blizzard." 3 hours later, Eleanor Marshall stood outside Michael's hospital room, her heart pounding with an intensity she hadn't experienced in decades. Admiral Harrison had arranged the meeting with military efficiency, but nothing could have prepared her for the emotional reality of this moment. "He's ready for you," the admiral said, appearing in the corridor. "I'll give you privacy, but I'll be nearby if either of you needs anything." Eleanor nodded her thanks and stepped into the room. Michael Harrison sat in a chair by the window rather than in the hospital bed, a deliberate choice that established this as a meeting between equals. The afternoon sunlight illuminated his features, highlighting the family resemblance that Eleanor had subconsciously registered during their first meeting. "Ms. Marshall," he greeted her, rising briefly despite the evident stiffness in his movements. "Please stay seated," Eleanor urged, "and call me Eleanor if you're comfortable with that." Michael gestured to a chair positioned across from his own. "Thank you for coming all this way, especially given the circumstances." The formal politeness created a framework for their interaction, a necessary structure to contain the emotional complexity beneath. "How are you feeling?" she asked, starting with the simplest concern. "Improving steadily," Michael replied. "The doctors say there won't be any permanent damage." "I was fortunate." "We both were," Eleanor acknowledged. Then, deciding directness was the kindest approach, she added, "Your father has told you why I'm here, what we've discovered." Michael nodded. "He explained the evidence suggesting you're my biological grandmother, the birth date, the adoption, details, the distinctive birthmark." His hand moved unconsciously toward the crescent shape behind his right ear. "It's compelling information." "It is," Eleanor agreed, "though I understand if you need more definitive proof. DNA testing could provide absolute confirmation, if that would be helpful to you." "I don't think that's necessary," Michael said after consideration. "The confluence of factors is too precise to be coincidental, and there's something else, something less tangible but equally convincing." "What's that?" Eleanor asked. "When you found me in the storm, when you were helping me recover at your farmhouse, I felt a sense of familiarity that seemed inexplicable at the time." He met her gaze directly. "It wasn't just gratitude for the rescue. It was something more Fundamental, a recognition I couldn't articulate until now. The admission touched Eleanor deeply. She had experienced the same subconscious recognition, had attributed it to wishful thinking. That Michael had felt it too suggested a connection that transcended their conscious awareness. I felt it too, she admitted softly. Something beyond. The circumstances. A moment of silence settled between them, not uncomfortable but rich with unspoken emotions. Finally, Michael spoke again. I have questions about your daughter, my birth mother, about your family, about the circumstances of the adoption. He paused, but I understand if those questions might be difficult for you to answer. Eleanor felt a surge of gratitude for his considerate approach. I'll answer everything I can, she promised, though there are gaps in what I know, particularly about Sarah's life after she arranged your adoption. For the next hour, they talked. Eleanor shared the story of her family, Thomas's military service in Vietnam, their purchase of Pinewood Farm, Sarah's happy childhood and subsequent rebellion after her father's death. She described her daughter's relationship with Jason, her departure for California, and the heart-wrenching phone call announcing her pregnancy. Michael listened with intense focus, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly allowing Eleanor to tell the story at her own pace. When she described waiting at the bus station day after day, hope diminishing with each arrival that didn't include Sarah, his expression reflected genuine empathy. She never contacted you again? After sending the adoption letter? He asked. Eleanor shook her head. No. I hired private investigators over the years, but they found nothing significant. It was as if she'd deliberately erased her previous identity. That must have been doubly painful, Michael observed, losing both your daughter and the grandson you never had the chance to know. It was, Eleanor acknowledged, but I found ways to cope, to build a life that had meaning despite those absences. She hesitated, then decided to share one of her most private rituals. Every year on your birthday, I bought you a gift, something I thought might be appropriate for your age. At that time, they're all stored in a cedar chest at the farm, 38 presents that were never opened. Michael's carefully maintained composure faltered slightly at this revelation. The concrete image of those accumulated gifts, tangible evidence of a connection maintained despite separation, seemed to affect him more deeply than the abstract concept of biological relatedness. I'd like to see them someday, he said quietly, if that would be all right. Of course, Eleanor replied, hope flickering in her heart at this first indication of potential future connection. Whenever you're ready. As their allotted hour drew to a close, Eleanor reached into her bag and withdrew a navy blue scarf she had knitted during long winter evenings. I brought this for you, she said simply. The winters in Montana can be brutal, as you've discovered. This might help next time you venture into the mountains. Michael accepted the gift with evident appreciation. You made this? Eleanor nodded. Knitting helps pass the winter evenings when you live alone on a mountain. She didn't mention that. She had created it specifically with him in mind, hoping for a meeting she had never truly expected to occur. Thank you, he said, the simple words carrying deeper meaning than their surface simplicity suggested. Before they parted, Michael asked one final question, one that suggested he too was looking beyond this initial reconnection. Have you ever considered visiting Norfolk? Once I'm fully recovered and back on active duty, I could show you around the naval base. It's a significant part of who I am. The invitation represented more than a casual suggestion. It was an opening to expand their newly discovered relationship beyond the extraordinary circumstances of their initial connection. I'd like that very much, Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. 1 year later, Eleanor Marshall stood on the front porch of Pinewood Farm, watching the approaching vehicle navigate her driveway. Beside her, Max barked enthusiastically, recognizing the now familiar sound of the SUV's engine. The Montana spring had arrived. Early this year, with wildflowers already dotting the meadows. Michael Harrison emerged first, his military bearing softened by casual clothes and the relaxed demeanor of someone returning to a place that held positive associations. From the passenger side, Admiral James Harrison appeared, his formal precision intact even in retirement. "Grandmother," Michael called in greeting, the term still new enough to carry a hint of wonder beneath its familiarity. "The drive was clear all the way from Missoula. Looks like spring is treating Pinewood well. Better than last year's storm treated you," Eleanor replied with gentle humor as she descended the steps to embrace him. Over the past 12 months, what had begun as a tentative reconnection had evolved into a genuine relationship. Michael's initial visit to the base hospital had extended to a week, giving them time to build the foundation of their unexpected family bond. Upon his return to active duty, they had maintained regular communication, eventually including Eleanor's first-ever trip to Virginia to visit the naval base where Michael served. Admiral Harrison had been an unexpected but welcome part of this evolving connection. When he announced his retirement after 30 years of service, Michael had suggested a trip to Montana to help his father transition to civilian life, an opportunity for both Harrison men to experience the Marshall family legacy firsthand. Inside the farmhouse, Michael paused to examine the newly hung family photographs in the entryway, an expanded gallery that now included recent images of him alongside the historical Marshall family photos. The visual representation of their reconnection had been his idea, a meaningful way to bridge the decades of separation. "I brought something," he said, reaching into his bag to extract a carefully wrapped package. "From my deployment journals." Eleanor unwrapped the bundle to find a leather-bound book filled with Michael's handwritten entries and sketches from his naval career. "Are you sure?" she asked, understanding the deeply personal nature of such a gift. "I'm sure," Michael confirmed. "My life before we found each other is part of your story too. You shouldn't have just birthday presents in that cedar chest. You should have pieces of the life those years contained." Over dinner that evening, a meal that incorporated both Eleanor's heirloom vegetables and recipes James had contributed from Catherine's collection, they discussed the future of Pinewood Farm. Eleanor had begun teaching sustainable agriculture techniques to local students, while Michael had started using his leave periods to help with projects around the farm, learning skills his military career had never required, but that connected him to the Marshall family tradition. "I've been thinking," James said as they finished their meal, "about what Catherine would make of all this." He looked between Eleanor and Michael. She always believed there were no accidents in how families form, that connections that are meant to exist will find their way, even against impossible odds. Like a lieutenant commander getting caught in a blizzard on his grandmother's property after 38 years of separation, Michael suggested with a smile. "Exactly like that," James agreed. "She would have called it destiny." Eleanor had never been prone to mystical thinking, had built her life on practical effort rather than faith in cosmic intervention. Yet the extraordinary sequence of events that had brought Michael back into her life defied rational explanation. A hiker lost in a blizzard, a desperate cry heard through howling winds, a rescue that revealed the grandson she had mourned for nearly 4 decades. The mathematical improbability was staggering. "Whether it was destiny or remarkable coincidence," Eleanor said, "I'm grateful for whatever force brought us together." She raised her glass in a toast. "To found family, both the ones we're born to and the ones we choose." As they continued their evening, Eleanor felt a sense of completion that had eluded her for decades. The ache of Sarah's absence remained, a wound that might never fully heal, but the presence of her grandson and the unexpected addition of James had transformed Pinewood Farm from a monument to loss into a living legacy. Outside, the Montana, spring continued its ancient cycle of renewal, wildflowers pushing through soil that had been frozen just weeks before. Inside, 3 people connected by extraordinary circumstance and deliberate choice continued building a future none could have imagined before a desperate cry in a blizzard brought them together against impossible odds. If this story of unexpected reunion and second chances touched your heart, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and notification bell. Your support allows us to continue sharing these remarkable human connections that remind us all that some bonds transcend time, distance, and circumstance. Have you experienced an extraordinary coincidence that changed your life? Let us know in the comments below. Your story could be the next one we feature. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most powerful connections in our lives come from the most unexpected places, and that even after decades of separation, the ties that truly matter can find their way back to us when we need them most.